Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cultured Pull List. This week we will be talking about the classic Wolverine story, Old Man Logan, that was first published in 2008. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome, everyone, to the Cultured Pull List, where we talk about comics, comic collecting, comic news, all things lovely and comic related. Now, this week we are covering Old Man Logan. If you're new to the show, we cover a major story arc or mini series every week and just talk about it and review it. And there's no real significant comic news to get into this week, so we're just gonna get right into the story. So, Old Man Logan. This is honestly one that I never read. I always I knew about it. I knew kind of where the story went, but for some reason I just never got around to reading it, which is really a shame because this is a really good book. But most people know that this book was the inspiration for Logan, the 2017 movie, and at the time, supposedly the last portrayal of Wolverine by Hugh Jackman. But yeah, I mean, really reading this book though, it's very loosely based off. The movie is very loosely based off of the Old Man Logan storyline. But yeah, Old Man Logan was written by Mark Millar, and he's written a ton of other comics, including Kick Ass and the Kingsman stories, which, we did cover all of those in previous episodes. So definitely check those out if you haven't already. But yeah, Mark Millar's a really good writer. He's just created so many different, really interesting characters and worlds. But this Old Man Logan story was part of the ongoing Wolverine series that Mark Millar was writing at the time, and the story was released as like a self-contained arc within, I think, issues of Wolverine issues 66 through 72, I think, and then there was like a annual that finished it up. But yeah, so this is a really interesting story. It's the continuity of it's a little bit weird, a little bit confusing. So it is an alternate universe. It is an alternate future, like a lot of these like dystopian future Marvel stories are, and DC for that matter. It's an alternate world technically, and the Earth is Earth 807128. Kind of a mouthful, but yeah. So this is an alternate universe where the heroes were defeated, like pretty much all the superheroes were defeated by the villains. All their villains finally like had the idea to band together and rise up and kill all the heroes, and pretty much everyone was murdered. All the heroes were murdered. I think Wolverine, Hawkeye, Hulk, and just like a handful of others maybe were the only ones that survived, and they all like went into hiding and did their own thing. So this is like several years in the future. I don't know if it's exactly stated how far in the future, but it's enough that like Hawkeye is an old man, and even Logan's like healing factor started to slow down, and he's an older guy at this point. Even though he's like his aging is super slow. What's also really interesting about Old Man Logan is that it was kind of revived later on by Marvel in 2016 after the whole Death of Wolverine arc, where the main universe, the 616 universe, Logan died. He didn't stay dead, but still he died. And Laura Kinney, X-23, took over the mantle of Wolverine. But Marvel also brought in an alternate universe version of Old Man Logan, but it wasn't the original Old Man Logan. It was Wolverine from a similar universe, from Earth 21923. So it seemed like most of the events of that universe were the same, but it wasn't the same Logan. But they brought him in to be part of the X-Men team at the time. Also, he had his own revived like Old Man Logan series that started in 2016. So yeah, it's kind of a kind of a crazy timeline there. So it's basically one of those stories you just kind of got to take as like its own thing. It's not really connected to the rest of the universe, though. I will say it is kind of interesting because they still kept the current like look of a lot of the Marvel stuff. Like it is in a lot of ways a product of its time, 2008, because like it shows the Iron Man and Captain America suits, and it's very clear that the in like a flashback it shows Captain America being killed by Red Skull, and it's very clear that this Captain America is the Bucky Barnes version, or at least has the same exact uniform. It's got that shiny blue and like more black prevalent in it and all that. Also, we do get a look several times at the Iron Man suit, and that is very clearly the Iron Man suit that was going on in like the John Miller Invincible Iron Man run around that time. So I did find that interesting. I don't know why they did that, unless it was just kind of like oh, this is just what they look like now. We're just gonna make the heroes have the current look just to avoid confusion. But anyway, yeah. So this is definitely kind of a, I know Elseworlds is a DC thing, but this is pretty much an Elseworlds story. So yeah, very interesting. I'm not going to talk too much about it yet because we're going to get into the book summary. And as usual, I'm going to have chapters in the YouTube video and timestamps in the description of the audio version. If you want to skip around, if you want to skip the summary or whatever, you'll be able to do that. And obviously, I don't usually say this, but it should be kind of said. There's going to be spoilers. There's going to be a full summary of the book. So if you haven't read this, don't want it spoiled, obviously, I guess skip. I mean, why are you watching this? But yeah, so just so you're warned. But Old Man Logan was written by Mark Millar with art by Steve McNiven. Inks were by Dexter Vines with Mark Morales and Jay Leiston. And the colors were by Maury Hollowell with a lot of other people: Christina Strain, Justin Ponser, Jason Keith, Nathan Fairbairn, and Paul Mounts. And the letters were by VC's Joe Sabino. And the publishing history of this book, or this story arc, is kind of interesting. It was published between June 2008 and September 2009. There was kind of some big gaps where there was like 2 or 3 months where they didn't publish another issue. I'm not 100% sure why, but that's just kind of how it goes. So yeah. Anyway, let's get into the story here. Like I said earlier, this takes place in an alternate future where the villains of the Marvel Universe have murdered all of the heroes. This happened like roughly 50 years ago when the story takes place, but yeah, the story opens with Wolverine in the past, right after the heroes are vanquished, and he's obviously been battle damaged, and he's making his way to some old train tracks. And it's not really clear what this is yet, but 50 years on, Wolverine has started a family, and he has his own farm that he's been working, and he has not been violent ever since. He's made a vow to not kill or hurt anybody else, and never to pop his claws again. But now Wolverine is now old. His healing factor's slowing down. He's aging, and he doesn't heal as fast as he used to. But he is having some issues with the farm making enough money, and he knows that the Hulk gang, that is the Hulk family that is in charge of the area of the U.S. that they're living in, is going to be coming to collect money, rent money, and they're very violent if you do not pay up. So knowing that the Hulks are coming and going to be violent, Wolverine's son, Logan's son, loads their shotgun, but Wolverine tells him to stand down, or Logan. So some of the Hulk kids show up, driving this makeshift, repurposed version of the Fantastic Car, and they threaten Logan because since he can't pay up, even though he's never been late before, and Wolverine, Logan, pictures himself killing the Hulks, but instead he ends up not being non-violent and getting beaten up himself by the Hulks. And Logan's son kind of chases them off, like he points his shotgun at them, but they mostly just laugh and leave and say, like, you got lucky this time. So while Wolverine is recovering from his injuries, I keep saying Wolverine, but I mean Logan because he's given up being Wolverine at this point. So Logan, as he's healing, his old friend Clint Barton, aka Hawkeye, shows up, who has glaucoma and is now blind, but is still as spry as ever. He shows up and offers Logan a job to help Hawkeye be a courier and take some supplies, aka drugs, across the country to some buyers, and he says that he'll pay Wolverine $500, which is apparently enough to buy several months of rent, which is kind of laughable nowadays. But yeah, so I guess in this world that's enough. So the next day, Logan does agree, but he says he's not going to be involved in any violence. and he'll just be the navigator for Hawkeye. So the next day, Hawkeye shows up in the spider buggy or the spider mobile, and they take off. And if you're watching on YouTube, you can see this whole big map of the newly distributed United States. You know, he lives in Hulkland, which is formerly the Abomination's territory, which is like all of the West Coast, and they're trying to get to the President's Quarter, which is pretty much the East Coast, and trying to get to where Washington D.C. used to be. That's where the buyer is. So on their way, they come across this old town. I think it used to be San Francisco or somewhere like that, and they end up seeing that the Moloids, Mole Man's they're like a race of underground creatures, have destroyed the whole city. And then as they stop to kind of look around, they are attacked by what are dubbed Ghost Riders. They don't really explain what they are, but they seem to have some of Ghost Rider's powers, and they seem to be like a biker gang. And they attack Logan and Hawkeye, and Logan refuses to fight back as he promised, but Hawkeye, even though he's blind, is still able to use his bow and arrow and kills the Ghost Riders. So the next day, Logan and Hawkeye stop at this town, and they are actually stopped by this Ultron bot who has a message from Hawkeye's ex-wife, Tanya. And apparently Tanya is the youngest child of Peter Parker, and she and Hawkeye were together for a while, and they have a daughter together, but Hawkeye left when the daughter Ashley was really young. But Tanya says that Ashley has gone off with some friends, and they've basically dressed up and tried to reform and become the new Avengers. And they went to go take out Kingpin and Kingpin's territory, but they've all been captured, including Hawkeye's daughter Ashley. So now Hawkeye's compelled to go after his daughter and save her. Wolverine protests at first because he wants to be back in time to pay the rent, pay the Hulks back. But Hawkeye eventually convinces him to go help his daughter, and that because he'll pay him double. So they make their way to go save Ashley from Kingpin, and we see that her companions, the self-dubbed new Daredevil and Punisher, are being put to death in this big arena in front of everyone. We see the new Kingpin has them publicly executed by the Savage Land Velociraptors. He feeds them to the Velociraptors, and Logan and Hawkeye are privy to this while they're trying to make their way into the fortress and save Ashley. And Hawkeye forms a plan, which is pretty much just driving the spider buggy on the walls into the base and just crashing through the wall, which seems to work, because then Hawkeye hops out and starts killing all of the Kingpin's men with a katana, and it actually sets Ashley free. But Ashley was not there to be a superhero. Instead, she was actually there to kill the Kingpin and take over his territory, which she does. And then she turns on her father and attempts to kill him to show her new lackeys that she is as brutal as the Kingpin. But Wolverine drives the spider buggy through and ends up saving Hawkeye from his own daughter. But Ashley does not take that and sends her newly acquired lackeys after them, which includes a bunch of guys in cars, as well as a bunch of dinosaurs from the Savage Land. But due to the Moloids, this big sinkhole opens up in the middle of the wasteland and drags all of the cars, everybody down into it. Now, Wolverine wakes up 2 hours later and sees the Moloids have attacked all of the Kingpin's men and killed them. But luckily, Hawkeye has used light to chase the Moloids away and survived. So Logan goes in and saves him from the upturned spider buggy, and they're able to drive it up the walls of the newly formed canyon crevice, whatever you want to call it. And they stop in Utah to grab a drink, and Hawkeye tries to get Logan to open up about what happened to him, why he took his vow of nonviolence, which doesn't seem to work. But then some dumb loudmouth in the bar starts insulting Logan, and Hawkeye and Logan just kind of snaps and almost pops his claws and kills the guy, which makes Logan run out of the bar upset, and he finally decides to open up to Hawkeye and let him know what happened to him, why he's taken this vow of nonviolence. So We see that back of the day of the big attack, when all the villains killed the heroes, Wolverine was in the X-Mansion with Jubilee. When a bunch of villains show up and they attack, they kill Jubilee and attack Wolverine, like, Strife, Dr. Octopus, and some others attack, but Wolverine's able to kill them all. But more villains just like keep showing up and keep attacking Wolverine, as well as trying to attack the kids in the X-Mansion. But somehow Wolverine is able to like kill every single villain that comes after him. And after he's done all of his slaughter, he realizes that he's been tricked and that he actually killed all of the X-Men, his friends. Turns out that Mysterio had been using some really advanced illusions to make Wolverine do this. So Wolverine runs off, riddled and overcome with grief, and puts his head on these railroad tracks to, I guess, kind of atone for what he did, even though it obviously doesn't kill him, but it still hurts really bad, as one might expect. And after that, Logan vows to never raise his hand in violence again or pop his claws. And Hawkeye now finally understands and respects his decision. The next day, they're driving through the wasteland again when they get attacked by another Savage Land dinosaur, a T-Rex, but this one has been bonded with a symbiote, which is kind of badass and terrifying at the same time. But nearby, Emma Frost sees what's going on and she decides to save them, so she sends Black Bolt, who is working for her, to go after and destroy or take down the symbiote dinosaur, which he does with his, sonic voice powers. So then Wolverine and Hawkeye are taken in by Emma Frost, who gives them some supplies and fixes up their spider buggy and sends them on their way. As they're making their way closer to their destination, they pass through this place called Pym Falls because it's where the corpse of Giant Man is, which is very reminiscent of Deadpool and Wolverine, where Cassandra Nova lived in the corpse of Ant-Man or Giant Man. So they finally make their way to New Babylon, which is their destination, which is run by the Red Skull. And Hawkeye is able to deliver the drugs, which actually turn out to be remade versions of the Super Soldier Serum. And he is delivering them to this resistance that is trying to build a new Avengers team to fight all the villains that have taken over the world. And Hawkeye says, as payment, all he wants is to be part of that Avengers team, which the guys agree, but it turns out that they're actually undercover S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and there is no resistance. The S.H.I.E.L.D. agents turn on them and they riddle Wolverine with bullets, Logan with bullets, and they shoot Hawkeye in the head, killing him. So then we see a flashback to the day of the big villain uprising, and we see Red Skull killing Captain America personally, as well as taking over the White House in Washington, D.C. And we then see the present, where Red Skull has taken trophies of all of the defeated superheroes, including Captain America's shield, Iron Man's armor, Cyclops' visor, all that stuff. And we also see that Red Skull pretty morbidly wears the costume of his dead arch nemesis, Captain America. So then we see the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents who, work for Red Skull come in with Hawkeye and Wolverine's bodies and body bags, but little do they know that they actually tried to kill Wolverine. And given that, his healing factor is slower, it took him a while to heal, but he's mostly healed at this point, and he ends up defeating all of Red Skull's men and then goes after Red Skull. And a pretty brutal fight ensues. It kind of seems like anybody's fight until Red Skull picks up the ebony blade and comes after Wolverine. But then Logan picks up Captain America's shield, and he's able to not only fend off Red Skull, but he beheads him with Captain America's shield. And as a ton of Red Skull's men start to burst through the door, Wolverine puts on the Iron Man armor Red Skull had and fights them off, and then flies back home, and he makes it just in time. Actually, he has a week or two to spare before the Hulks come. But it turns out the Hulk's got impatient and came by and killed his family while he was away anyway, which angers Wolverine so much that he pops his claws and becomes Wolverine again. So he starts his path of vengeance, and he just slowly starts to pick off the Hulk's kids one at a time. and he's able to steal their fantastic car, and he ties one of them to it and sends him like into their base, which is just a big like junk pile trailer park. But he straps a bunch of explosives to him, so he kills a bunch of them then, and then he just slaughters all the rest of the Hulks himself. So the only one left is Bruce Banner himself, who has been affected by a big nuclear bomb that went off near there, and it seemed to give him like more strength than normal in his human form, but also seems to have messed up his brain, which is, I guess, why he is this kind of hickish mob boss type character. So he and Wolverine fight, but Wolverine's able to stab him through the chest. But that just makes him angry and turns him into this like giant mutated version of the Hulk, which pretty easily overpowers Logan and eats him. So the only surviving members of the Banner gang, the Hulk gang now, are Bruce Banner, his grandson Billy Bob, and his infant son, or I guess his toddler son, Bruce Jr. And as Bruce and his grandson are talking, he begins to get this terrible like cramp in his stomach, and Wolverine bursts from inside Bruce or Hulk's body, obviously having healed from being eaten, and he ends up sparing Billy Bob and Bruce Jr. and actually takes Bruce Jr. himself, kind of in recompense for Hulk taking his family, and now he's gonna raise Hulk's son as his own. So 1 month later, Logan has buried his family, and he decides that he's going to leave the town and go off to fight all the remaining villains that have taken over the country. And he's taking little Bruce Jr. with him, kind of a Mandalorian Grogu situation. And he rides off into the sunset, ready to use his powers for good now instead of hiding them. All right, Old Man Logan. I kind of knew what to expect. I knew at least that like Hawkeye was in it. I knew that they used, the spider mobile or spider buggy, whatever. And I knew some other I knew like the Hulk's offspring were in it. But other than that, I really didn't know the rest of the story. And to be honest, it's kind of a simple story. Honestly, kind of like Logan, the movie. But there's a lot of stuff and a lot of moving parts that really make it kind of complex. But I'll be honest, like I expected this to be good, but I enjoyed it like a lot more than I expected to. This is like the most entertaining a comic has been for me like in a while. So I like really enjoyed this. I thought the art was great. Stephen McNiven did a really good job. I really like that style where it's very like realistic. It feels like it would translate perfectly well to like live action. That kind of art. That's kind of my favorite style of art. It is very much a dystopian book, which isn't exactly new, but at the same time, it's like that kind of happens every time there's a dystopian book. I feel like even though it's not the first dystopian comic story set in the future, it's probably one of the most iconic. But it honestly had a lot more to do with the comics and comic booky than I expected, which I really loved because like it makes sense. Like I know like I'm sure some people like prefer Logan, the more grounded like version of Wolverine, but I feel like that worked in that movie because the Fox universe was already kind of grounded, and they were like the mutants were the only superheroes. If you're gonna have a future dystopian Marvel universe, it wouldn't really make sense to not include all the other heroes or mention of them and villains and stuff. So I think that worked really well in this book. I think it really towed a very precarious line between being serious, mature, kind of bloody and grounded, while also being very comic booky and having a ton of comic characters. But it put all those comic characters in a very like dystopian, grounded, messed up world. And frankly, I think I did that pretty much perfectly. Um, like I know a lot of people like love this story. I think some people don't like that it's not more grounded, but I don't know. I feel like if you don't like this book, like let me know in the comments if you don't like it and give me a reason. But I feel like if you don't like this book, you probably aren't a huge comic book fan, like, or you really just like grounded comics. But I feel like like if you're really into comics, comics are crazy. There's a ton of, crazy superheroes, villains, powers. It's a crazy world. So if you like don't want that in a comic book, I don't really know what you like, I guess. But I think they did. Like I said, I like how it's like a mix of grounded and like crazy comic bookness, but it's still very mature. It's like still very violent, very a very messed up world. I really like the dynamic between Hawkeye and Wolverine. They kind of had, not really a buddy cop, but just kind of a buddy, like a team up adventure journey type story. I thought was really cool. I thought the ending, I thought the ending was very. I feel like when you have an ending that's that messed up, you very much toe the line of like you can either go have a happy ending, and then people are like, oh well, that just doesn't feel like a real story, like something like that would actually happen. Or if you go like too messed up of an ending, you'd be like, oh well, you're just being edgy. So it's like you can never really win. I feel like this story benefited from having such a messed up ending. Even though it kind of makes everything that Logan did up to that point. I don't know if I'd say not worth it, but he kind of failed in his mission. Like this is the whole point he was doing this whole going on this whole run with Hawkeye was to get the money to bring back to his family to save them, and save their farm and everything from the Hulks. Which he did everything right. He got there in like 2 weeks before. He the rent was due, but the stupid Hulks just killed his family anyway. So in a way it's very like like what's the point of the story, but at the same time I feel like it fits really well with Logan. Like Logan is just always just put through the ringer. He's always trying to do the right thing, but he's always just kind of like forced into this box where he has to be this ruthless killer, but deep down he wants to be a good person, and really deep down he is a protector as well. And I think they really captured that really well in the X-Men movies, especially the Wolverine movies. But I think that really this story really kind of leans into that. Like, yeah, like Wolverine can just like never win. And I think that makes a lot of sense because I feel like the whole story, at least for me personally, I kind of wanted to see Wolverine be Wolverine, even though the whole thing where he vowed for peace, it all made a lot of sense. Like I kind of saw it coming halfway through when they kept showing the villains, but then when they were having that big flashback, I was like, I doubt Wolverine is going to be that upset if he killed a bunch of villains. I feel like he must have been tricked into killing all the X-Men, which is really fucked up. And I don't think it's the first time this has happened, but I can't remember another time. I feel like there's been some other adaptation where that happened, but maybe I'm wrong. It sounds kind of familiar though. I think it might have happened in the Marvel like Wastelanders audio like scripted podcast series, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But yeah, so I thought that was like really messed up, but I think it like worked for the story really well. And honestly, I was kind of hoping and thinking that's the direction they were gonna go in Deadpool and Wolverine with the main like Logan variant that we saw. I kind of expected it to be something like he accidentally in some shape or form he hurt or killed some or all of the X-Men. Oh yeah, they kind of did that in Logan where Professor X accidentally killed all the X-Men. But I think it's really messed up, and I think it really like I feel like that makes sense why Logan would vow to never be violent or pop his claws again. And I feel like it would have to be something insanely horrible, like his family being murdered, for him to just go berserk and pop his claws again. Which, even though it was horrible, it felt kind of satisfying to see the berserker Wolverine again. But I like how it ended too. Like even though he went off and killed all the Hulks, got revenge for his family, he decided that like he realized he can still use his powers and abilities. He doesn't have to like be hurting the people he cares about. He can still use that for good, and he sets off and decides to use his powers to actually fight the villains that have taken over the world. I think that's a really cool ending. I feel like just everything that happens on the journey is just really a good balance between like happy, like yeah, the good guys winning, and like that's tragic and horrible, and I guess kind of rings true because not everything happens the way you want it to in life. So yeah, this yeah, I really enjoyed this story. The only thing I think that really okay, there are two things that I kind of didn't love. First off, I thought it was weird that Hawkeye's ex-wife was Peter Parker's youngest daughter. Like the timelines didn't really add up to me. Um, unless this is an alternate universe where Peter had kids young, but he would have had to have three kids before. Or I think he's no, I don't think they said how many kids Peter had, but you know, the youngest daughter, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Like, I guess he would have had to have all those kids before all the, you know, before he was murdered by the villains. But they never really mentioned who his wife was. The wife, what's her name, Tori or something. She didn't look anything like Mary Jane or Black Cat or any of Peter's love interest that I can think of. Like they never really they just sort of threw that in there. To me, feels like just to have Ash like take on the mantle, like to be dressed up like Spider-Man and stuff. I feel like that was the only reason. And then Ashley or yeah whatever like you know is I guess the granddaughter of Peter Parker. I just thought that was kind of an odd detail and like you know how old is Hawkeye then? Like to marry one of Peter Parker's kids, it's kind of creepy because he would have had to be like 40 years older than her at least. It just feels kind of weird. I don't know why they threw that in there, and it didn't really seem to advance the plot that much. Besides, you know, Ashley putting together her own like little like new team of Avengers or whatever. I thought so. I thought that was a little strange and unnecessary, and I didn't really like what they did with Hulk at the end. I was totally cool with you know like Hulk's offspring being you know this like weird hick, you know, criminal organization basically. Just a bunch of, you know, thugs. But I didn't like that Bruce was still alive leading them. I guess it makes sense that he'd still be alive. I felt like it was just such a deviation from his character to have him be like from going for like I know it's been several years, but going from one of the smartest people on the planet to you know this really just kind of dumb like hick type character who's like living in this giant trailer park slash cave and leading this whole family of thugs. It just felt kind of weird. I know they said at some point that like you know a nuclear bomb went off and that further mutated him and made the Hulk bigger, but also gave him radiation poisoning. And I guess they kind of alluded to the prospect that that made him insane. But I feel like there's a difference between going crazy and just like becoming like a dumb hick, I guess. Like I felt like that was kind of weird. I feel like they just did that because they wanted to do it, have another, you know, big fight between Wolverine and Hulk, kind of like in you know, Wolverine's original appearance was fighting the Hulk, so I think they wanted to bring that full circle. So in that respect, it was cool, but I felt like it just felt so far off from Bruce Banner's character. Like even you know, however many years, like 40, 50 years, it just and the radiation poisoning messing up his brain. I feel like it was just still far off. I think it might have been better if he was dead or like he just wasn't involved with what his kids were doing. It kind of made it. Yeah, it was just kind of strange. I did like at the end how he ate Wolverine and Wolverine just like burst out of him. But one, like, wouldn't he think of that? And two, like, how did he eat him? Did he swallow him whole? Because he couldn't like bite through his bones. I wouldn't think his adamantium bones. So, like, I thought that was cool, but it also didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So, like I said, like that's really the only like part of the story besides, you know, um, Hawkeye's ex-wife being Peter Parker's daughter that I didn't like about this story. Everything else I thought was great. I do want to draw some parallels between this book and some other like media that have kind of taken inspiration from this. So I mean, the very obvious one is Logan. Really, the only real similarities between Logan and Old Man Logan is that like Wolverine's, you know, he's older, he's losing his hearing, he's healing factor, and like the way the future looks is very kind of desolate, kind of like in the Old Man Logan storyline. And like I said earlier, kind of the parallel between Wolverine killing the X-Men and Old Man Logan versus Professor X killing them in, you know, the movie. Also, a small detail that I noticed was at some point in Old Man Logan, I believe it was Emma Frost was saying something about mutants haven't been born for 40 years. And in Logan, I think it was like 20 or 25 years, no new mutants were born. So I kind of think they probably took that from the Old Man Logan storyline. But the other big thing that I noticed was the inspiration for Marvel's Wastelanders. Now, if you're not familiar with this, Marvel's Wastelanders is this audio scripted podcast series that Marvel put out starting in like 2020, I believe, or 2021. And like it started with Old Man Star-Lord. And it's very obvious that it is based loosely off of Old Man Logan, because like first they start off with Old Man Star-Lord, but it is definitely a different universe. But it is very similar. Like, the United States is split up amongst several villains. Um, and Hawkeye's still alive, but in this, Star Lord is still alive, so is Black Widow, and then obviously there's Logan, but then Doctor Doom plays a big role later. But yeah, I mean, honestly, I will say if you haven't listened to this and you're into like podcasts or scripted podcasts, audio dramas, I would definitely check this out. It's available like on all podcast platforms, but it is actually very interesting. There's like 5 series. There's the Star Lord one, there's Hawkeye, Black Widow, and Wolverine, and then Doctor Doom one, and then they like culminate in like a crossover just called Wastelanders. But they have a lot of really good like actors who do the voices. Like Susan Sarandon is Black Widow, Stephen Lang is Hawkeye, Robert Patrick is Wolverine. So yeah, it's very cool series, but they definitely took like the obvious inspiration from Old Man Logan, but there were a few like details in it, like Ashley, Hawkeye's daughter. She's in Wastelander as Hawkeye, but she's a very different character. She isn't, just some, she isn't trying to take over the criminal underworld, from Kingpin. She's actually a good guy. She has her own mission, but it is more like altruistic and trying to save someone she loves and getting help from her dad, Hawkeye. So they definitely took that character from Old Man Logan, but unless I'm mistaken and Old Man Logan took it from some other storyline, I'm not sure. But yeah, so there's that. And then one other big thing I noticed was in the Star Lord Marvel Wastelanders, they meet Emma Frost at some point, and she appears young, and they reveal later that's because she's using her telepathy to make herself appear young, the same way she did in Old Man Logan. So those were like the big things that I've seen other media take from this Old Man Logan storyline. I'm sure there's like plenty of others. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that symbiote dinosaur was insane. I was not expecting that, and it is like kind of crazy, so maybe if you weren't looking for something so bombastic in the story, it might take you out of it. I thought it was crazy. I kind of thought it was awesome, honestly. And the way that Black Bolt took care of it was perfect. Like his powers are like the perfect anti-symbiote powers, so I think that worked really well. But yeah, overall, I thought this book was very good. I've been actually like rating books recently, like with, a number rating. And yeah, so I mean, I think I would give this an 8 out of 10. I thought it was very good. I enjoyed it a lot. And yeah, it's probably the most entertaining I've had, most entertaining experience from a book I've had in a while, like a comic book. And it's kind of short. Like even though it's 8 issues, it goes by kind of fast. Like I feel like there are some books that are only 6 issues that feel kind of like a slog. This was simple but complicated at the same time, and it was very straightforward. It wasn't convoluted at all. It all made sense, and it was very easy to follow, but still really interesting. And yeah, I really liked it. Let me know in the comments what you thought, what you think of Old Man Logan, whether you like it or did dislike it or more in the middle, whatever. Let me know. If you want to get the trade paperback, if you don't own it and you want to, I'll leave the Amazon link in the description. But to wrap things up, as usual, we're gonna do the cultured picks of the week. And this, these are newer books that I've read that I thought were worthy of note, but weren't, a big enough story to actually cover on the podcast. At least not yet. Now these are both new-ish. They've come out this year, but they aren't like from the last couple weeks or anything. But the first one is Annihilation 2099. I haven't really been keeping up with the other current 2099 runs right now. Like I know there's a Miguel O'Hara Spider-Man one, but this first issue, this Annihilation seems to be kind of a bunch of one shots. Like they are leading into a bigger story, but they're focusing on different characters. So this first one is Logan 2099. I'm not Logan. Spoiler. Nova 2099. I'm not really sure if this is supposed to be 616 or not. I think so, because Spider-Man 2099 is 616 as far as I know. At least he was originally. So I'm not 100% sure on that. But Yeah, so spoiler, Old Man Logan, well, not another version of an older Logan, is Nova 2099. Now, some people didn't like this. It was like, oh, every character is Logan, but this worked surprisingly well for me, and maybe I'm just saying this because I'm a huge Wolverine fan, but I think it worked really well because, like most for future versions of Logan, his healing factor is slowing down, and even to the point where he lost an arm, but the Nova Corps was looking for some test subjects to do this experiment to basically harness the power of the Nova Corps. And instead of just being in, their suits, they were trying to put it into an actual person. So the only reason like Logan could survive a procedure like that is because he still had some of his healing factor left, and it worked well. Like it even boosted his healing factor to like how it was when he was younger, maybe even more powerful. But he also had like the power of the Nova core in him. I don't remember what is like the Nova Force or something. Yeah, it is the Nova Force. So he has the Nova Force in him, which is kind of awesome in my opinion. It kind of takes Wolverine, who's kind of OP just because of his healing, but not really like the strongest character at all, but kind of puts that and makes him like a super powerful character. And I thought that was very cool. But it's also like in typical tragic fashion, he's the only Nova left because this crazy virus like this that turns people into like these monsters attacked Xandar and started to turn everyone into these monsters. So Wolverine, like whoever wasn't killed by these monsters, Wolverine like had to kill all the monsters and everyone who was being infected by them and everything. So the entire Nova Corps was wiped out either by the monsters or by Logan. And so now he's the last Nova, but it was so cool to me because it felt kind of like a old Clint Eastwood like spaghetti western type where he's just kind of going around the galaxy, as the last Nova, just kind of helping people in need. And what's really interesting is like since his power doesn't come from his suit, the suit actually channels the Nova Force. So he has these guns that channel the Nova Force that's inside him, which I thought was pretty cool. But he fights these guys, these aliens that somehow get a hold of some symbiotes and attack this small town. And in very like classic Western fashion, he saves the town from these bandits. And like the whole book, you don't. It takes a while for you to like realize who's Logan, but like you kind of already know towards the beginning, and eventually he in classic Wolverine fashion just pops his claws and just cuts the guy's head off, which is awesome. But he also like can't really control the Nova Force super well without his suit. So I just thought that was all really cool. Honestly, I think this is a really cool version of Wolverine, in my opinion. Kind of combining Nova and Wolverine is kind of badass, in my opinion. And it doesn't seem like they're continuing his story in the Annihilation 2099 comic series, but they are coming out with this Conquest 2099 in October. I'm not 100% clear, but I think it might be kind of a culmination of all of the 2099 books they're doing now, but they are going to continue the story of Nova 2099 or the last Nova, which I think is pretty cool. I'm definitely gonna pick that up, and it looks like there might be like a team up with him and Spider-Man. So if there is, that would be badass as hell because Miguel O'Hara is super cool, and so is the last Nova Wolverine. So last thing I wanted to talk about is the newer series called Get Fury. This is another like kind of alternate universe Marvel book by Garth Ennis. I've only read the first two issues. There's like probably like 4 or 5 out now. But so far it's been really interesting. It's basically an alternate universe where like in the Vietnam War, Nick Fury is like he's accused of stealing like secrets from the U.S. government, and he's been captured by the Viet Cong, and the U.S. Army sends Marine Special Forces soldier Frank Castle to eliminate him, and it's just a really cool war story. If you're really into like war movies or war stories, you'll like this. But it's basically like a war story starring Nick Fury and Frank Castle, which is very cool. It's just a pretty cool story. It's definitely mature. It's definitely. I mean, it's by Garth Ennis, the same guy who did The Boys, so it's definitely got more graphic stuff in it. But very interesting. Definitely check that out if you're into either of those characters or you like like war setting or the Vietnam War setting. It's very interesting. I would definitely suggest checking it out. But that's all I got for this week, folks. Thank you so much for tuning in, either watching this on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Apple, or wherever. Be sure to hit like, subscribe, share, comment, all that stuff. If you want to help support us, we can keep bringing you more great content. Check us out on patreon.com/theculturednerd and look for the Cultured Pull List specific tier. Thank you to all the current Patreon supporters of the Cultured Nerd. I have been your host, Michael Malillo. Our logo and visual assets were designed by Jose Navarro, and our intro was designed by myself. Thanks again for joining us. If you'd like to check out the Cultured Nerd or the Cultured Pull List on social media, you can scan the QR code on the bottom left if you're watching this on your computer or TV. And if you'd like to check out Casual Experts, which is my other brand that me and my co-host do together, we have our own Instagram and our own other podcast and YouTube channel where we more just like talk about, nerdy stuff like movies, comics, TV shows, all that stuff, kind of in a more in-depth way, in-depth and thoughtful way. So yeah, if you want to check that out, you can scan the QR code on the bottom right.